In 2024, the world became rapidly more dangerous, and the likelihood of the use of the most destructive weapon, namely nuclear weapons, began to rise. This created a new, extremely tense trajectory for international security and increased the risks for the new Donald Trump administration. Its task is to try to stop the wars in Europe and the Middle East, and to more broadly reverse the dangerous course toward the proliferation and possible use of nuclear weapons, which has accelerated against the backdrop of these conflicts. The key destabilizing factor has been the actions of Vladimir Putin. Over the past year, he has sharply raised the stakes in Ukraine. His rhetoric and actions have led to the breakdown of nuclear barriers that, for 7 decades, kept the US and Russia from directly threatening the use of nuclear weapons. Putin announced the full combat readiness of Russia's nuclear forces and then conducted exercises to test the readiness of non-strategic nuclear assets under conditions as close to combat as possible. Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Thank you for being with us. I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and I will tell you about the Kremlin's nuclear intentions. So, let's get started. That year, particular concern was caused by the launch of a new Russian hypersonic ballistic missile at Ukrainian targets and the official announcement of a review of the nuclear doctrine. According to the new version, Russia is significantly lowering the threshold for using nuclear weapons in response to a conventional threat to its territory. Moreover, the doctrine stipulates that an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear one, is considered a joint attack. American analysts have claimed that Russia is not preparing to use nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine, and that the threats are viewed by Ukraine's supporters as a bluff aimed at limiting Western support for Kyiv. But even if that is the case, the rhetoric and changes in policy have already had a real long-term impact. Before the war in Ukraine, the leaders of the US and Russia almost never hinted at the possibility of using nuclear weapons. Now, however, such threats have become part of ordinary political discourse. This has led to a lowering of the psychological barrier and a renewed discussion within Ukraine about the necessity of its own nuclear deterrent. At the same time, rhetoric backed by an updated strategic doctrine lowers the nuclear threshold not only in the current conflict but also in future ones. It is possible that even Putin himself understands. To maintain the credibility of his threats, sooner or later he will have to show that real actions can indeed follow his words. An additional risk is posed by Moscow's cooperation with Pyongyang. The Mutual Defense Treaty between Russia and North Korea was signed in 2024, and this treaty increases the likelihood of Pyongyang receiving more advanced nuclear weapons technologies and expertise. Moscow has also blocked the extension of the UN group's mandate that monitors compliance with sanctions against North Korea, thereby reducing international pressure on its nuclear program. These events have once again intensified debates in South Korea and Japan. In both countries, doubts have grown as to whether the status of non-nuclear states provides a sufficient level of national security. The escalation of North Korea's rhetoric, its rejection of reconciliation with South Korea, as well as the possibility of acquiring new nuclear technologies from Russia, create entirely new risks for Seoul and Tokyo. The discussion of their own nuclear programs, which was previously considered peripheral and theoretical, has once again become part of the public political discourse. At the same time, the war in the Middle East is also disrupting the already established balance. Iran may acquire nuclear state status either in response to Israel's devastating attacks directed against its territory or against its allied groups. This refers to groups allied with Iran. This, in turn, has raised the question of whether Israel will try to prevent such an outcome by launching a direct strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. The logic of a preemptive strike remains a topic of discussion, as Iran's closer cooperation with Russia and China heightens concerns about the expansion of its nuclear capabilities. China, in turn, is also intensifying the global trend of nuclear arms buildup. The U.S. Department of Defense report emphasizes that Beijing is rapidly modernizing and expanding its nuclear forces, believing that they are necessary to deter U.S. intervention, control escalation, and prevent a first strike. Notably, China views the expansion of its nuclear arsenal not only as a tool of military pressure, but also as a means of political influence in protracted regional conflicts. The role of technology has become a separate risk factor. Artificial intelligence, when integrated into military processes, can automate certain elements of nuclear control. With nuclear weapons, such a scenario is potentially dangerous because an algorithm error or incorrect threat recognition could lead to escalation even without human involvement. Another aspect is related to the development of peaceful nuclear energy. The growing importance of nuclear energy in the context of combating climate change increases the circulation of materials and technologies that, without strict control, could be used to create the very same weapons. Against this backdrop, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, emphasizes that resolving the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East is a priority for his administration. However, any solution to these conflicts must take into account the need to prevent the accelerated proliferation of nuclear weapons. Measures to reduce risks are seen as a starting point, and certain signals already exist. China and India, according to reports, have also signaled to Putin the need to lower the level of nuclear rhetoric, pointing to the dangers of further escalation. Despite the apparent limitations of such measures, they lay the groundwork for broader risk control agreements. An additional alarming signal was Putin's statement in 2025 about the need to prepare for a possible nuclear test explosion. He instructed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, intelligence agencies, and civilian departments to gather information and present coordinated proposals on starting preparations for the tests. The initiative came from their Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov, who had previously raised these issues. Russia ceased its participation in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 2023. The last such test the country conducted was back in 1990, when a 70-kiloton device was detonated at a depth of about 600 meters on Novaya Zemlya. Since then, Russia has adhered to international agreements, although it has periodically returned to discussions about the possibility of withdrawing from such treaties. Thus, the statement made in 2025 became the clearest signal yet of a potential resumption of testing in more than 3 decades. At the same time, attention was drawn to a documentary film about Putin's presidential terms. According to British journalist and military expert Hamish de Breton-Gordon, the film contained several alarming statements. Putin stated that the goals of his military operation remain unchanged and also expressed hope that nuclear weapons would not have to be used. The expert noted that such statements sound different against the backdrop of the rapidly deteriorating situation for the Russian army at the front and rising costs. According to the expert's assessment, Russia's losses in killed and wounded are approaching 1 million people, and over the past year, Moscow has managed to achieve only limited advances. Breton-Gordon believes that Putin initially counted on a quick victory, especially after relations between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky worsened during their meeting in the Oval Office on February 28th. However, later on, Trump's rhetoric became tougher, which reduced the room for maneuver for the Russian leadership. The expert also emphasized the economic factors. The production of Russian military equipment largely depends on revenues from oil exports. Against this backdrop, OPEC's decision to increase production and Saudi Arabia's desire to keep the price at around $50 per barrel are putting serious pressure on the Russian economy. At the current level of expenditures, according to the experts, such a situation could bring Russia closer to bankruptcy. Against this backdrop, the expert does not rule out that Putin might try to use tactical nuclear weapons, hoping to quickly change the situation on the front lines. He suggests that the Russian leader could target a strike against Ukrainian forces, not expecting a response from the United Kingdom and France. At the same time, Breton-Gordon believes that the use of tactical nuclear weapons can still be prevented. In his view, this requires ensuring that NATO would respond with either conventional forces or its own tactical nuclear weapons, supported by the United States of America. That is the situation as it stands now. Thank you for being with us. Be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and we'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye bye, everyone.